Alright, Crim 5, let's knock out Chapter 12, Special Populations and the Police. This is something we've talked about a lot. Just go into a little bit more specifics about it in this chapter. But first and foremost, the police must be the first on the scene every day, every minute. They must decide who is in need of help and who needs to be removed. They have to maintain their composure after being called every name in the book. That happens all the time. They have to act in the best interest of everyone, even youth, who insult them. And they have a responsibility to help children, elderly, disabled people, and basically everyone else. So, special problems for the police would include the young. We know that young people, the court system is a little bit different for them. The elderly and the disabled. So these are three groups that are most in need of services from police, but they're also, to a certain extent, kind of difficult to deal with. They all need protection, and youth and vulnerable are more at risk of harm. So youth between the ages of 11 and 18 are, more than any other group, are confronted and contacted by the police. Okay. Interaction between the police and children who are younger than 10. This is really tough. When you have a young person that you're dealing with, it's under 10 years old. Just think about yourself at 10 years old. What are your reactions going to be? What are you going to think when you have contact with the police? And how are you going to behave? And how do children now behave? And how can police handle them in such a way that protects the child and the community? Good question, right? So, police and children, what police would like would be for children to actually see police as a protector, hero, whatever, someone that they can go to when something goes wrong. It's not necessarily how little kids see police. I think I told you about the story when I was at the elementary school talking to little kids, and a little third grader came up to me and called me a pig without any idea that it was even kind of rude. It was really sad. It was really, really sad. So I'm trying to change that. Oh gosh, during teenage years, this is rough. During which most of the delinquency and incorrigibility take place. If you can remember, some of you aren't there that far out of those teen years, and some of you might still be in your teens, but the whole concept of trying to gain independence. This is a time when, if a police officer approaches a kid in front of other teenagers, that teenager might feel threatened, disrespected, things like that. It's really, this is a tough time to deal with young people for all of these reasons. I'm just going to leave that blank. You can see this. I'm going to skip that. Blah, blah, blah. Preparation for career. Programs specifically for juveniles. Understanding the elderly. More than 60% of the elderly live in metropolitan areas. That means we're talking about big cities. Many live in high crime areas because the rents are lower. Crimes by the elderly are increasing, and the United States population in general is getting older. We are living longer. There is no typical older person. And you probably have seen this even with your family members. You might have maybe two grandmothers, one, and then they're both 75 years old. One of them seems like she's 90, and the other one seems like she's 50. It just, everybody ages differently. Some of them lose their mental capacity. Some of them lose physical abilities. So dealing with the elderly can be obviously really challenging. Older people are more affected by chronic disease and acute illness. I think we probably all know that. Those are the prominent health issues: heart disease, arthritis, diabetes. Physical limitations do set in, and they are more prone to accidents. Physical and mental health are usually closely related. Totally makes sense, right? If you feel horrible physically, mentally, maybe you're not feeling so great either. So trying to work with the elderly in a way that is compassionate is interesting and difficult. Handicapped. There are physically and mentally handicapped or mentally handicapped people. Physically handicapped, maybe we're talking someone in a wheelchair. Maybe we're talking someone who is missing a limb. Maybe they can't walk. Whatever that issue is, they still need protection from the police. Then physiological disorders, Tourette syndrome. Could this become a problem when dealing with police? I'm not sure how familiar you are with Tourette syndrome, but this is an illness where people will typically have these nervous tics or uncontrolled outbursts, like where they just scream. And if a police officer doesn't know what's going on, it can be very confusing. Autism, very similar, not sort of, similar type of reaction. An autistic child or adult may really not like physical contact. So if the police officer even kind of gets close to touching one of those, a person with autism, they might physically react. And then Down syndrome. Typically with Down syndrome, it's a little more, you can actually observe the distinctive features, but all of these are issues that police officers need to be familiar with. Physical incapacitation, spinal cord injuries, all that kind of stuff. Blind, do they come in contact with police? Yes. Deaf, do they come in contact with police? Yes. I had a young lady on my caseload for more than a year that was deaf. It was really interesting. I learned so much about American Sign Language and the deaf community. These were things that I had to adapt to as a probation officer. And again, police deal with different types of people like this every day. Mentally handicapped. We know some people are developmentally delayed. A lot of times those are people who are victimized. People with learning disorders. Mental illness. Some people have mild mental illness and some people are completely outright insane, as this slide says. So, and everything in between. Again, police officers are expected to know how to deal with all these people. Homeless, significant issue, certainly in our area and basically all of California. How many homeless people are in the United States? We really don't know. And how do you deal with homeless people? Good question, right? Depends on the situation. Dependent people. These are people who need help with their basic needs. These could be young people, and typically if you are a dependent, you are under 18 and your parents are ultimately caring for you. But adults could be like that as well. Adults with any kind of handicap or the elderly. They are commonly victimized. And the Constitution, actually it was a court case called In re Galt in 1967, is the first case where juveniles were actually determined to be treated differently than adults in the whole court proceeding. The concept of parens patriae was adopted, and parens patriae, if you've had me in Crim 11 or probably any of my other classes, we've talked about parens patriae being basically the court stepping in as the adult, as the parent. And my unprofessional way of saying it is the court is your daddy. But the whole concept of parens patriae took place in England, where the king would basically, if there were young people in the streets committing crimes, any of that kind of stuff, the king basically said, you are now my child, and I will raise you and make decisions on your behalf because your parents aren't doing their job. So parens patriae, pretty important concept. Might want to know that for a quiz, just saying. What else? Imagine what you would feel like if you were developmentally delayed, victimized, I don't know, assaulted, and then had to deal with a police officer. There's a lot of frustration that takes place with cases like that. And the elderly, again, just imagine all the extras that these people had to deal with. The elderly, the disabled, young people, children. So myths about youth. All teenagers who commit delinquent acts are going to be adult criminals. That is not true. All teenagers have severe adjustment problems during adolescence. That is not true, thank God. Teenagers can't be trusted. Who thinks that's not true? I'm kidding. That is also not true. And all teenage groups are gangs. Okay, so I'm hopeful that you guys did not fall for any of these. None of this is true. Myths about elderly people, sorry. People over 65 are more often victimized than the rest of the population. That is absolutely, positively not true. Young black males are the most likely to be victimized. Women over the age of 65 are frequently rape victims. That is not true either. Now, does it ever happen? Yes, it has happened, but it is not common at all. The elderly are totally dependent on others. That's not necessarily the case. Some of you have grandparents, or maybe your parents. My parents, for example, they support themselves. They volunteer. They do all kinds of stuff. So it's not necessarily, that's not true. Elderly can't, oh gosh. Yeah, we don't want to talk about elderly people and sex, but anyways. And intelligence reaches a peak in the 20s and declines. That's not necessarily true either. So none of this stuff is true. Myths about the handicapped. They cannot take care of themselves. A lot of handicapped people do take care of themselves. The mentally ill are dangerous and cannot be trusted. Some of them are, but some of them are not. The mentally retarded do not know what is going on. Not necessarily true, and the police should not treat the handicapped differently than anyone else. That is also not true. Myths about the homeless. Usually men, usually mentally ill, heavy drug and alcohol users. They chose that lifestyle. They're dangerous. They don't work and they get their money from stealing. And they all migrate to your community. Sorry, again, those are all myths, not true. None of that is true. I'm just skimming through this because I don't think anything in here is new approach. How service is provided. Do we have services and programs for everyone that we deal with? This is a tough one because it's really hard to find finances to deal with every possible needy group in the population. We're talking about the AARP, Are You OK?, Citizens on Patrol. Many departments make use of senior volunteers. And I think this is the last slide. So I think we're done with this one. Yes.